thing. I think that when we get to know each other a little bit better, then we can become more personal, okay? So at first, I'd like it to be kind of informative, if, since you were interested in these things, and why not? But I would like to really begin with questioning to you. Why are you so interested in Milos Forman and Ragtime?
For me, okay.
Yeah.
Within the past year, I saw the movie Arthur,
Uh-huh.
and then I saw this John Gielgud won the Oscar, and I said, I don't think he was that good. So I looked at the people that he won that won at the same time as him, and there was this guy Henry Rollins of Ragtime. He was a
Ragtime.
black actor, and I know that Louis Gossett, whatever, won the year right after him, and I was wondering, well, I wonder what would have happened in like an alternate history if he won. So I watched a couple scenes. I watched a scene of this baby being dropped off. I was very impressed with the production designs. I watched the scene of this baby being dropped off on this doorstep, and I could link to it, and I I just thought it was a really interesting scene. And then I just watched a couple more of these clips and I just thought it seemed like a really interesting movie. And I thought we could discuss Amadeus because I love Amadeus. I know you were involved in Amadeus, but Ragtime
No.
is really kind of a very unheralded gem. And I think it's a really
uh,
great ensemble piece where some of the stories it starts with aren't the stories that it ends with. I've never seen an ensemble film like that.
huh. And and how about people who are listening to us, your parents and Margot and so on? Uh, you have seen the film, or you know about it, or Orin told you? Daphne, tell us.
That's my
Hey,
mother. I'll unmute her. She's not that good with
no, listen, can you?
she's not that
Why
good
do
with
you
using
mute your
Zoom.
mom?
So
She will choke you.
I'm gonna unmute her.
We go.
Yeah, and
Can you
unmute
hear me?
everybody.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah. What was your question? What was your question?
If you're familiar with those films, or maybe work of Milos
Oh,
Forman, and
okay. No, what we did is we saw the play
you
on
saw the play.
yeah, we saw the play and we really liked it, but we never saw the film.
Yeah.
And, but we like the topic.
Uh-huh.
And, well, and Milos Forman had other movies that we've seen, so we
Yeah.
are interested in him, and we're interested in your take on him.
Yeah. I tell you, my take is I could give you a mouthful, so I don't want you to possibly.
We have people here who have seen the film. I imagine Wendell has seen it.
Wendell.
Yeah, back when it came out.
Don't bother Wendell when he's swallowing his dinner.
Has Adam seen it? I try to get people to watch the film because I do think it's an extraordinary film.
Well, maybe people can watch it afterwards, or watch
Yeah.
it or rewatch it. It's actually, but if I may begin, it's like, how much time do we have, Oren?
Well, I mean, why don't we start with kind of, what the experience was like growing up in the Czech Republic?
No, no, no.
You don't want to
Forget
talk
it.
about that.
Forget it. Forget it.
Well,
We
how
are
did you
going to
come to
talk
get
about
acquainted
Milos Forman.
in with Milos? Why don't we
Milos,
start with that?
listen, listen. Okay, I'll tell you one thing. When I was about 16, 17, actually, the Soviets came to Czechoslovakia, and I found myself out in the United States as this kid living with a Jewish family in St. Louis because they took pity on me, just like some nice people took pity on their grandpa who was escaping from the Pale of Russia back at the turn of the century. And I stayed with them for 9 months, and I went to the movies in St. Louis, and there was a film which was called Fireman's Ball. It was Milos's fourth
For that movie.
feature film, and he spoke bad English. He was only about 30 plus years old or something. Hello, Katie. And and he had to introduce the film because the American audiences would not really understand that type of humor. It was a spoof on firemen, and I mean, with what happens in life, with fires. Nobody makes jokes of firemen. And based on Milos's film, Fireman's Ball, which was done in 1968, produced by Carlo Ponti, of all people. The firemen, 20,000 firemen in Czechoslovakia went on strike. And they said, well, if Mr. Forman makes a lot of fun of us, let him extinguish the fires himself. That was February 1968. And so Milos had to go in front of the camera and introduce the film that he does not mean any bad press for the fire brigades. He respects them and all that. But it's a film about human nature. And this is actually what struck me completely as fascinating aspect of Milos's work, that he was making metaphors, large metaphors, which were his stories about human nature, who we as humans are. You know, we are jealous and we are creeps and we are smart and cunning and good and bad and all that. And he has this unbelievable theory, Milos, at which he made public the moment that his old alma mater, which was the famous film school in Prague, gave him an honorary degree, doctorate of arts. And he said that there are 3 ways of becoming rich by telling the truth. And that he is one of those 3 methods. But the first one, you have to be a genius to discover something like Galileo Galilei or Albert Einstein, and then you tell the truth and you become famous and rich. The second, that you have to be a martyr, kind of like Martin Luther King Jr., or in the Czech history, Jan Hus, or maybe Joan of Arc. And for your truth, you're going to be losing your life. You're going to be burned or killed, martyred. So that's a second way to become famous, not rich, but famous. And the third one is to tell the truth in a funny way, in a fun way, entertaining way. And Forman was a master storyteller. If I ever met any master storytellers, he would be one of maybe a few. I asked an old Czech actor in Los Angeles once, what makes Milos Forman so special? And he said he is a genius storyteller and he is a very talented producer. And that combination made him what he is. He was, as a producer, he's extremely ambitious. I mean, extremely ambitious. And as a storyteller, extremely gifted. He was an amateur actor in his youth. And so when I saw this 30-year-old creature introducing his outstanding film, which was in 68, I think it was nominated for an Academy Award as the best, one of the 5 best foreign films, didn't win it at that time. So I was kind of struck by the personality. I didn't know him yet, but because my father was a writer in Czechoslovakia back in 1968, 67, he's one of those people who caused the reforms in that system back in 67, 68. They called it the Prague Spring, and the Soviets didn't like it, so they came in and quote unquote liberated us from ourselves. So my father had been a friend of Milos Forman, and I, as an opportunistic student of cinema back in 1970, 72, 73, took advantage of it, and I met him. And I had at NYU, I had a project. It was a great course called Authorship and Manufacture of Film. I went, hello, Margot. You have a nice bridge behind you. Anyway, so I went to interview him and I befriended him. I asked nice, friendly questions and he told me a lot. And I if you can say that you fall in love with a creative person, not sexually, not in a creepy way, but as an impressive essence of humanity and talent, so that he was one of those. So I decided, if I can, I would love to work with him on any film I could. And it happened 7 years later, 1980, when he was making Ragtime. And this is just a coincidence that he was then making Ragtime. And I, with the help of his close friend Ivan Passer, who was a co-screenwriter and co-director on all the Czech films that Milos made. Back then, they had 2 Academy Award nominations at that time. So I was a production assistant, and Forman didn't want to accept anybody because he was a director, and his producing talent and instinct told him, hey, don't get too involved in personal favors and politics because everybody wants them. And so it ended up being a situation like this, that there were 25 production assistants on this film. Film was fairly big. It had about 1,000 extras. And the producer, executive producer, and perhaps even more than that, was Dino De Laurentiis, right? One of the 2 co-owners of Cinecittà with Carlo Ponti. And so Forman didn't want to rock the boat from that point of view. And he also didn't want to rock the boat from the point of view of planning to go to Czechoslovakia in a couple of years. This was 1980. In 1982, 83, he was hoping he was going to direct the film of his dream, which was Amadeus.
Wait, can I ask a question, Pepi?
Oren, you want to ask questions and I want to talk. So how do we do it?
Well, just to guide and to a little bit point of clarification.
Okay.
So after I discovered this movie, we came for the we had the Passover Seder together, and you mentioned that when he made One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest and he won all those awards for that, he had the Capitol do whatever he wanted. So was this his?
No, he could never do whatever he wanted, but once you are such an awarded and money-making director, everybody listens to you. They don't let you do what you want. And Oren, this is a good question, because you will discover soon that Milos could not do what he wanted vis-a-vis the producer, Dino De Laurentiis.
Muted.
He wished that he could, but he couldn't. Directors in this country cannot do whatever they want. Directors in Russia, maybe Italy, maybe Poland, can do what they want, or could until recently, until advent of more free market economy. But
so at the time with Ragtime,
but the people listened to him, and he had a nose for what subject is a money-making and an attractive subject. I was once in his house, and next to his bed on a night table was a stack of screenplays. I'm not kidding you. And I counted them. There were about 30. He was reading at that point about 30 screenplays. He was extremely hardworking in preparation of what subject could be attractive. And he had a great sense of it. And that's the talent of a producer, in fact. He also claimed, Milos, that the 2 most important things for a director is to find the story, and second, or at the same time, find actors. So he said story and casting are 80% of success. The rest, technology, cinematography, everything comes in place if you have those 2 things. And you know what? It's very interesting. I teach at Nova part-time, and my students don't need any instruction in those 2 areas. They all know how to tell a story, and they all know what a good actor does. They need lots of instruction in cinematography and taste and editing and so on. But in terms of storytelling, so he had these 2 talents, Milos. And but anyway, so Oren, you want to ask a question? Go ahead.
Well, I guess one is that was Ragtime kind of his Citizen Kane, his like big ambitious like Lawrence of Arabia?
No, no,
It
no.
wasn't.
But Amadeus was.
But Ragtime was first. Why did he do that one first?
Well, you see, you always do it. It's kind of like playing to get into the Rose Bowl or into the World Series, right? You have to win some games, then you win a pennant, and then you finally get into the championship game, and you hopefully win the championship game. That was his goal, to win as many Academy Awards as he could. And sometimes it happened as a coincidence. That's with One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. Didn't win much with, or at all with, what was it? His musical, right?
Hair? The
Was that
1979 film with the 1979 film Hair that he directed,
Hair? Exactly.
the one with
Not that
Aquarius.
much. Not that much with Ragtime, but a lot with Amadeus. That was his basically Super Bowl, Milos's. But he actually had a very uh, rational approach to all these things. That's the thing. Uh, but anyway, so Ragtime, he did kind of not as a step because he thought that every film is important and every film could be your last film. And but he loved the theme of it. And the theme of it, and he took it out of Doktorrow's book, which is one of your questions. He took a theme of justice and injustice, and that to him was a completely important theme. Even in Amadeus, in the Czech films, in Cuckoo's Nest, in Hair, in all those films, if you think of it, justice and justice. And I'll tell you how it works in that film, in Ragtime. It's a story of two men who kill, right? One is an African American, the Ragtime player, whose car is soiled by Irish fire brigade in New York City at the turn of the century. They shit on his car. And he demands justice. He says, oh, you guys clean it. I'm a black man. I have a car. I am a good musician. I earned it. And you clean it. And of course, they don't clean it. They do more and more and more. They sink the car. They throw it in the pond. And he becomes a terrorist. He says, I'm going to take justice or a brigand, take justice in my own hand until they apologize to me and replace my car clean. I'm not going to give up. So he loses his life. The other one is a rich man, architect White, who also kills because he's just a man with a huge hubris. And he gets pardoned. So for the same crime, one man dies and the other one, the white rich man, doesn't. And this was the theme that Milos took from the book. I mean, Doktorrow is not really a writer of. He had a great invention, but he really took historical models, Houdini and everybody who is in those books. They usually have lived. So he has historical models. And Forman took out of that book that main theme because to him it was the most important theme in the world. Now in the film, which ended up being 3.5 hours, there were two stories, double end, for both men. One killer, the black man, loses his life because justice is not blind, and the white man wins his freedom because justice is not blind. And so you could see the trajectory of those two heroes as a X, letter X. They go in an opposite direction, and one ends up happy, gains his fortune, and the other one loses his fortune for the same thing. And why Milos liked, or was not liked, he found it as a meaning. He liked what Viktor Frankl talks about in his book called Search for Meaning. Frankl was a medical doctor who survived the Nazi camps, and he thought of the future. If he survives, when he will take all his experience as evidence for his medical psychiatric teaching at the University of Vienna, and it happened after the war. And he invented a new brand of therapy called logotherapy. Therapy, psychiatric therapy by meaning, looking for meaning in life. And Forman was very much touched by that. I'm not sure that he was touched by it specifically, but he was also searching for meaning. He actually claimed that even if you search for meaning, it's meaningful. So he was looking for meaning in life, and this theme to him was an essence of meaning, justice, and trying to tell truth about human nature, that one person can win and lose, and the other can lose for the same thing. That's injustice.
So there's a quote from the 1940s where a film critic was saying that it's ironic that a Sicilian immigrant, a German immigrant, and an Austrian immigrant shaped what America looks like on screen. And if anyone in the comments wants to guess which three directors he's writing about, I think it's interesting that this filmmaker who created films that were very critical of Czech society crossed over into America. And I think Ragtime is a film that really has its pulse on American society. And I think People vs. Larry Flint, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest with counterculture and freedom of speech issues. Did this mean that he really assimilated well into society and kind of figured out exactly what was on the pulse? Did it also mean that maybe he just
it's much more universal, because he was a half Jewish kid who didn't know about being half Jewish, Milos. And he grew up until probably his age 17, 18, when he didn't realize who he really was. Because his Jewish father, father, his real father didn't know that the mom had a fling with a Jewish architect, and Milos was born out of that union. And I mean, it's a totally fascinating story, but Milos was a basically orphan, and the only parent who survived, his mom didn't survive Nazi camps either. She was a Czech Christian, didn't survive. His not biological father didn't survive either, because he was considered to be a partisan and a saboteur by the Nazis. He died in a camp. And the only, the real biological parent who survived was the Jewish father. His name was Otto Kohn, Kohn. It's interesting that you have a name Konheim, right? It was Kohn. And he escaped before the Holocaust to South America. I'm not sure, either to Peru or Bolivia. And he didn't want to have anything to do with Europe afterwards. So Milos ended up without anyone. And he was a hurt person who understood justice and injustice extremely painfully. It's kind of like if you're a one-eyed person, you appreciate light even more than people who have both eyes. So the theme of justice and injustice for the same aspect was the key thing for him. And he, as you might say in America, went to bat for it. That's what intrigued him about the film. To do a parallel story of two men who do the same thing, and one wins his life and freedom and one loses it for the same thing. And now Dino De Laurentiis, when the film was finished, and it was a pretty good film, a little longish maybe, but good film, and the story was in it. Dino De Laurentiis came to Forman at the end of editing and he said, look, the film is too long. We can show it only 4 times in the movie theaters as is, like over 3 hours. But let's cut out at least half an hour plus and make it under 3 hours, and we will show it 5 times in the movie theaters. You'll make more money. I'll make more money. And what do we cut? And Milos didn't want to cut anything because the story needed to have the parallel in it. And Laurentiis, producer, is sometimes, in this country, producer is more powerful than a director. It was De Laurentiis' decision, and he cut out the end of the white man. So there is, the film has, it's like a letter X, which is losing one of those lines up above the half, and it becomes a Y. And till they both died, neither one spoke to each other because Forman was deeply hurt and he lost the fight for Ragtime. If Ragtime existed in its full version, it would have been a really important film because of its theme. And of course, there is artistry and there is ensemble and there is great cinematography and all that stuff, yes. But it's the theme which rings truth. So Forman's theme stopped being truthful, and he was a fanatic about truth, believing in through his life that if he tells the truth in a way which is not either extremely intellectually advanced, or if he doesn't burn himself, doesn't burn at the stake, but he will tell the truth in an interesting way, he will be successful. That was his yardstick of success. When he made Amadeus, he succeeded in it. You could see a person who, both talented musicians, again, it's the fate of 2 men, right? Both are talented musicians. I think they are kind of equal in many ways, but one thinks that the younger one, undeserving one, is super talented because God gave him better talent than he had, right? Salieri. And it's a comparison of 2 fates. And this is what makes Forman tick. Comparison of 2 fates. He works on comparisons. And that's a successful film. And the same is about Cuckoo's Nest. It's also a story about 2 men. The Native American, right? The Indian chief, and McMurphy. 2 men. It always is a comparison of 2 fates.
With Ragtime, we mentioned it's on an ensemble film. I think it works really well because there are a lot of ways to make an ensemble film. You can make a very bloated cast. You can try to make it all tie around a single theme like Babel or Crash. But this is one where the trial of the century, and by the way, that's a real trial, it starts out as one thing with these characters, Sanford White and Evelyn Nesbit, then it goes to a family, then it introduces the ragtime player, Cole, and then by the end of the film, Evelyn Nesbit is no longer relevant to the story. I thought that was a really interesting way of doing it. You're saying that was somewhat unintentional?
Yeah, completely. I tell you, Milos lost control over the editing of the film. And I think it's one of his greatest disappointments. And not that he told me I'm disappointed by it, because his, dynamo went forward. And he was really looking forward to making another film unpressured by an Italian tycoon, Dino De Laurentiis. They didn't speak to each other. I mean, Milos hated the guy.
What happened to the white man in the scene that got cut?
Are you referring to Sanford White, by the way? not the white man, an arc.
Sanford
Can we
White.
explain this for a second to the people who haven't seen the movie?
You
Um,
explain it, Oren.
the film is sort of a tapestry of the start of the 20th century with some fictional characters, played by Mary Steenburgen, James Olsen, a bunch of people, and then there are actual historical figures, including Harry Houdini, Booker T. Washington, and most importantly, this three-way scandal love affair that involved a famous architect, his lover, and the lover's husband. The famous architect put a naked statue of his lover on top of some famous building. The husband got jealous and shot him in broad daylight in Madison Square Garden or whatever the predecessor was it. He got put on trial, and it was one of those trial of the century type things. And it's really interesting because he weaves that nonfiction story with fictional characters. I'm not necessarily sure how
So,
he decided which fictional characters and not which non-fictional characters to put into the
yeah,
movie, because there are a lot in the book.
I tell you how.
what happened in the scene that got cut out to the white man? Uh,
You mean Sanford White?
I tell
yes,
you,
yes.
only
What happened to him?
actually what happened to him that he was gonna be sentenced just like the black man, but that part disappeared from it. So the second half of the film is only about a black man barricading himself in the city library and blowing it up. So
Okay, so the scene that was cut out was him being sentenced.
that's right.
Okay, that's what I needed. No, because what I remember of the film was that of just him being hauled away to do um
He gets declared insane, right?
yeah.
But Oren, to answer your question about the other characters, because it's such a mosaic of characters, that for a filmmaker is not a good thing. You have to simplify in film. So Forman simplified it and cut out a lot of the characters. For example, Pancho Villa and Houdini. And even though they shot some of the scenes, they never made it into the film. And Forman had no intention to put them in the film. Because in film, if you go too wide, too broad, you lose the focus and the thread. Film is kind of like a sprint, like a run. You have to concentrate on running ahead. You cannot go to the sides as you can go with literature, because literature you can reread and fall asleep and go back to it and read it again, but not a film. So Milos knew that. This led to a hostile relationship with the writer Doktorrow, who actually was able to send only his son to be one of the assistants, not a production assistant like a lowly life, brings coffee, runs for things, washes windows, was my job, but windows on the set. But uh, the son was able to sort of sit in around the table when Forman and whoever helped him with the screenplay were working. But Forman did not want to work with Doktorrow because writers have a big problem on film. They want to include their beautiful words, and they do not really appreciate, with very few exceptions, they do not appreciate a cinematic, simplified in many ways, dramaturgy, because the dramaturgy is simplified because the pictorial richness is so big in film. So Milos was a cinematic filmmaker, and he did not really, as far as I know, ever work with pure writers of the subjects.
Was
And
he scared of working with
no, he was not
an
scared at
author?
all. He just was a terrific filmmaker.
What was his
Filmmaker
relationship
is
with Ken, the One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest guy? Like Ken, whatever was Ken Creasy or something, or
Nah, Milos, listen, he finished film school in Prague as a screenwriter. He was a so-called dramaturg and a screenwriter, and he knew the secrets and the. It's like if you're a chef, if you're if you're a hamburger chef, you do differently than if you do French sauce béarnaise and sauce Robert, which is based on another sauce. So he was a chef of a certain kind, and he was not a writer. Milos was an outstanding storyteller. He was not a writer. He did not get high on putting words on the page, but he got high on putting scenes and shots and sequences together. And anything that stood in its way, he just put by the wayside. Like if you're a pilot, you just fly ahead. You cannot look too much to the left, right, and so on. You fly ahead. While a
So,
writer can.
oh, sorry, okay. So,
Right.
this was an ensemble, and a lot of people don't realize how deep this ensemble goes. You had Debbie Allen, you had Jeff Daniels, Samuel L. Jackson, you had Donald
Yeah.
O'Connor from Singing in the Rain. Um, some of these people were probably not that famous when they got to the set of Ragtime. Um, I don't even know if Henry Rollins ever did much again. I don't know how big Elizabeth McGovern was at the time. What were your memories of like these people on
Well, I tell you what, there was one giant star, and it was James Cagney. I mean, he cast Cagney, and when Cagney came on the set, he had actually a decent chunk of action. He was 86 or so, and he was after some operation in which he was seen in a wheelchair. And the insurance company said, well, he is in a wheelchair. We're not going to insure the film. And then they somehow got it insured. That's an important thing. And when Cagney came on the set just to take a look at where he's going to play, he had the set in quote unquote in second half of the film when the main character is being ferreted out of the city library, which he threatens to blow up. He was the police commissioner. And when he came on the set, everybody stopped doing totally everything. And Forman opened the door and said, James this and James that. And I had never seen him to be to be like a Chamberlain of a British king. Normally he was not. But so that was a giant star, and all the other stars like Brad Dourif and Mary Steenburgen, and they all, wanted to touch Cagney. But as I said before, Forman believed in two functions of a film director: choosing the story and casting. So on casting, he had a great, great sense. He had some help, obviously, but he had to be happy with the cast. And, I mean, he knew some of the actors like Brad Dourif, he knew from Cuckoo's Nest, right?
I'm surprised though.
And he had Twyla Tharp for the dance, right? He trusted her completely, and she brought in a lot of the dancers.
So no one cared that Donald O'Connor from Singing in the Rain and
Well, I
Golden
don't
Globe
know
winning
that.
actor was on the set. He was
Listen, Oren,
just a third-rate
I
actor
was a
on set.
production assistant number 24, okay? I just told you that I brought coffee. I spent about one afternoon between Milos and the cinematographer Ondřej Czech. They were talking Czech, and I was listening to them saying, hey, put the camera a little bit higher. How do you like this? And nobody else could understand. And at that point, the assistant director, who was also a co-producer, his name is Michael Hausman, then he became a professor of production at Columbia. He stood as an assistant director on a stepladder so that he can be seen and heard yelling into the megaphone. Everybody's ready, quiet, blah, blah, blah. And he saw me, some stupid production assistant, giving chewing gum to the cinematographer and giggling at their Czech jokes. So he said into the megaphone, Lustig, what the hell are you doing over there? Like 150 people heard it. And, I mean, Forman and the cinematographer, they really didn't pay any attention to me anyway. I was kind of quiet. But it stopped a little bit of a rehearsal, and he relegated me to about 500-600 meters away from the main action to the second floor of some building on 10th Street or 11th Street. What was it? 2nd Street, 2nd Avenue, 11th Street. And he said, you wash these dishes, these windows so that they are clean. And that was that's how close I got to it,
No, I was asking about Donald
So
O'Connor.
I can't answer everything.
I was asking about Donald O'Connor. Was he not very important in the grand scheme of the set? Because I mean, I would consider him a very big star.
I tell you, it's like on a film set. Oren, have you ever been on a film set?
I was an observer on How Do You Know with James L. Brooks in 2010.
Okay, well, I mean, on the set, there is so many things happening.
Yeah.
Everybody's involved in their own task, that you don't really. You're asking journalistic questions.
I'm
Journalistic
hoping to,
questions
yeah.
are, in a way, writer's questions, where a writer has time and distance from the action and is an observer, and therefore a writer can ask certain philosophical or questions which are out of the hustle bustle of things, But if you're running a race, you're not looking at left and right. So I am not the best person to answer
Oh,
these questions.
well, you have to be because I don't have
I am
anyone else on
not.
the set of Ragtime to ask questions to. Um, so the set was, tell me about like the set. It was filmed in London and New York City, is that right? And
I tell you,
and you
the
also said
set
that
was a
he never filmed in Hollywood, is that correct?
no, Hollywood. Recreation of Lower East Side at the time of the Jewish immigration, if you remember the street, right, with Hebrew letters and all that. And there were about 2,000 extras or so. I was one of them at one point. I'm cut out from the longer version. They gave me a haircut, a funny hat, and they said, well, stand here, guard the door so it doesn't open, and you be an immigrant here with another Czech guy who was a production assistant number 23. But anyway, so the set was huge. It was at the time of no digital effects yet. You needed the numbers of people. And they were walking back and forth, and Hausmann was giving his orders to 2,000 people from the ladder in the megaphone that gave him some authority. I befriended some very minor actors who all were making fun of him, but we had to listen. He was a co-producer as well. And so it was a big hustle bustle. And Milos, I can tell you about this because I was interested in Forman. I was interested mainly in how a director works. And I loved some of the actors. Debbie
You
Allen.
mentioned you were friends with Steenburgen.
That's right. She was a great person. I was listening in their stories how they got to acting and what they thought about the scenes. And Rollins and Mandy Patinkin, actors are very friendly people. And if they say, "Hey, can you bring me a Coke?" and they don't have the time, or bring me a napkin, so you do it, and if you do it 5 times, then they treat you like a nice waiter. You're around, fine. And so that was my main interest. But I discovered about Forman that he had to get up about 5 or 6 in the morning and be ready by 8 o'clock on the set. And there are so many people, and it's a huge responsibility. By midday, by lunch, they work for 4 hours. Then unions say, well, now you have to have a break, half an hour to 1 hour. So it was usually 1 hour. Lunches were outstanding, whatever you could want in terms of sandwiches. And he had a trailer, and he went religiously into the trailer at 12. And he had a plate of white rice with peas and carrots in it, like a child or a sick or a patient, with lemon. And then he had 1/3 of a liter of Czech beer, Pilsner, which was imported to him. And then it was 12:30, and he fell asleep for 20 minutes, and nobody could disturb him. No actor, no telephones, no one. They kicked me out of that place at that point. And he slept, and by 1 o'clock, he reappeared from the trailer, refreshed, and he was able to be sharp and bright until about 6 p.m. That's when they called it. It was in August, I was there in August. Days were long. 6 o'clock, they stopped working. And Forman went into the screening room to see the dailies from previous days and worked till about 11 or so on next day's scenes. And he slept maybe 5 or 6 hours. And this is how he lasted for about 3 months.
Wow.
It was fantastic. Then I read actually a study from Harvard that they found out that to do this, to take a break in midday for 20, 30 minutes is more refreshing than drinking all the coffee you can get. And you're as bright in the afternoon. So he struck me as a very bright director who was mainly working with the actors. And how a director works with actors, move faster, the gestures are too big, slow down, less intense, it's not theater, and so on and so on. So that's what I was really interested in, and I saw maybe 2 days of that till I was kicked out and sent off the set and do all kinds of stupid errands. It's a stupid job that you production assistant. It's nothing fantastic. But about 20 production assistants were from Milos's classes at Columbia University. So his students, where he did not appear too much in classes, apparently I had a friend who got a master's from there, and I asked him, how many times did you see Forman? And that was an MFA in screenwriting. He said, I saw him once. And we went to his apartment. He sat in a sofa and he talked with us.
So, what about Amadeus? What was your role in there? How did you get
I
there?
had no role in Amadeus. I was just an observer, like you say.
Well, I know,
And
but how
it
did
was
you
very
keep in touch
similar.
with Milos after Ragtime? I mean, you've mentioned that you
We
knew
became
him.
actually friends. Would you believe it? At first, he avoided me because I was a son of an immigrant. We had prison sentence on us from the Czechoslovak government before 1989. And Milos knew that he wanted to make Amadeus in Europe, mainly Vienna and Prague. And, Mozart spent months in Prague. He visited 5 times, extended times, and had 3 operas performed there. So he wanted badly to do it authentically in there, and he didn't want to upset the cart by becoming too visibly friendly with Czech immigrants, although there were about 20 Czech immigrants on the set, including a couple of good actors, but they didn't get a speaking role. And Milos was actually guarding his position towards the Czech government so that they wouldn't ban him from filming it in Prague. And afterwards, and after 1989, when you didn't have to worry about becoming leprous from other lepers, then he was a very, very friendly guy towards the end of his life. And my personal interest is to become a filmmaker a little bit better than very average or mediocre one. And so I wanted to pull his brains, for the most. That's what I watched. And I did not bother him by journalistic questions because I would lose any contact with him. You understand that?
You're I don't know what you're saying. No.
No, because if you talk, journalists usually
Yeah.
not have great relationship with active artists because active artists need to do active art.
Where's the score 50 right
Journalists
now?
observe active art. They can report on it. So I could not, I was very curious, and I actually kept a diary about everything that Milos told me, and I gave it to my old man to give me a piece of advice what to do with it, if I can publish it. And he said, yes, and give it a title. I said, what title should I give it? And my father said, use this title. The king spoke and said nothing.
I see. Yeah. Well, yes,
That was
us
my
journalists
relationship to
definitely are
him.
busy people for sure. Um, yeah. So, well, it's a movie that's very visually ornate. I think a lot of it came down to just the setting, the scene, the production design. Possibly, I don't know if I've ever seen anything like it. How did that come about for
You see,
Amadeus?
there was Patricia von Brandenstern. She was a German countess of some kind, and she was the art director in it. And she and the cinematographer Mirek Ondříček, they spent a lot of time walking around the sets, whether it was in, what is it, Times Square or outside of New York City, or on the Lower East Side, and they painted the front that the camera will see, kind of like a Potemkin village. It became a real set. They really rebuilt a set, and she, for example, she actually painted everything with fresh colors, and the cinematographer said, no, we have to age it a little bit so that it doesn't look like it's freshly painted out of the store. So they spent time by Patricia going to paint everything brand new and shiny, and the cinematographer, Ondříček, who also was, he was the DP, he was trying to age it, to make it a little bit shabbier and more part to life. And then there were dozens of costumes people, and in that sense, it was a very, like you say, ornate, gorgeous, outstanding production. And that's basically the merit of Patricia von Brandenstern and Mirek Ondříček, the cinematographer. Those two, they did it beautifully.
All right. So, first of all, why don't people raise their hand if they have questions, as we're kind of getting close to that part. I was hoping people would jump in the middle, but let's do that. Give me a raise of your hand using the react part. There are very few films. I mean, there are films about corruption, there are films about love, there are films about self-fulfillment. I think this might be the only film I've ever seen that is basically about envy. How did he pick that as a topic to make a film about, and then set it as a period piece? And how did it become so successful? I've heard it's the best reviewed film of the 1980s.
I tell you, reviewers are losers. Reviewers, they don't know what they are talking about, mainly. I'll give you a good example.
No, but it's the best reviewed film of the 1980s, not the worst, the best.
Well, yeah, you can't believe it. Look, you have to look at the film yourself, and you have to look at it twice. At first, you react to it like you react to it to any other film, and then you take more or less an analytical point of view, right? And say, hey, this works, this doesn't work, and so on. You have to be savvy about it. Reviewers are not. They see it once at the most, and they see a million other films, and they blah blah together all kinds of stuff. And I'll give you a good example. I worked on another film before Milos's film, by his best friend Ivan Passer, and it was in Los Angeles. It was with Jeff Bridges. It was a good film, good enough film. It's called Cutter's Way. And that film got in trouble because of the studio. The studio was called United Artists, 1980, and Cimino was making his great epic for 50 million or 37 million bucks, which was called Heaven's Gate. And all the films in the studio were put on a back burner. And so the film I was working at cost 5 million bucks, and the other one 37 million bucks. And the studio didn't have enough money to publicize the other films than Cimino's. And so they put it on a very back burner. And it was reviewed in the first cut. It was reviewed by I forget the name of the reviewer in New York Times, and he said it's a disaster. It's a bad film, blah blah blah, and he's surprised that it's in it. And even though good actors were in it, John Hurt, Bridges, and so on, and so the studio didn't release it for 2 years, and they changed the name. It was called Cutter and Bone, and then it was called Cutter's Way 2 years later. And under the different, it was the same. And the same reviewer said it's a fantastic film. It goes through forth like a locomotive pulling a train. The same. And you know what? And I spoke to the director about his idea of the reviewer. He called him terrible names. And I asked about some other reviewers, and he called them also terrible names. I said, why? He says, because from their reviews, I never learned anything about how to make a better film. So if a reviewer is able to teach a film director to make a better film, they would have a good reputation, but it doesn't happen. The best reviewers are other filmmakers. Like in literature, if you buy book review, they are fantastic because other writers review other writers' books. But directors don't have the time to review and write about other directors' films. Okay, Oren, that's my take on it.
I agree with you. I think movie reviewers are in a state of crisis, and if you look at the state of Rotten Tomatoes versus the state of Rotten Tomatoes user scores, but I don't think that's me. I think my reviews, along with, say, Jenny Nicholson, I look at the screenplay and I think of how I would have written it better.
Okay, so you're a
follow
budding
my reviews.
writer.
I think all bad. I think 90% of reviewers are bad, but I'm one of the good ones. Although I'm not really that professional.
Hey, nice to meet you.
All right, so why don't we go with and by the way, I think you were referring to Heaven's Gate,
Heaven's Gate.
the film that's bankrupted a studio. That's a good story to learn one day.
Yeah.
Before we go to questions, can I tell you about who I'd like to dedicate this talk to? Is now a good time to do
go
it?
ahead, tell us, Oren.
Okay, I'd like to dedicate this talk to so here's how I met Pepi Lustig. In 2016, my father was retired. He's on the call under Arnold Kahn. He was taking a course at George Mason University. He was an old man taking the course, and I'm sure that
What do you mean old man? He was just aging a bit.
he was aging person, and everyone else in the course was probably college age. And there was one student in the class who didn't see that as a barrier and reached out and befriended my dad. And so the two got to talking, and they realized that they lived in the same neighborhood in Arlington, Virginia, and they even had a mutual friend, which would be Margot, who's on the line if you want to wave, Margot. And they had a get together, and that's where I met Pepi. And Pepi started sharing his stories and his pride in his homeland of the Czech Republic. He loves talking about the Czech Republic. And I soon met the other four Lustig kids, and they're four of my favorite people in the world. And they are also like this, where everyone in the classroom would see my dad as an old guy who's not worth talking to. And they're like, well, I'm a college student. these four other Lustig children do such an amazing job because they live closer to my parents than me of checking after my parents, treating my parents as just interesting, and they just have formed an amazing intergenerational friendship. And Jacob, Joseph's oldest son, is no longer with us. He passed away tragically a few years ago. But I think his legacy lives on in the connection between our families, the Lustig and the Konheim families, and and he's really brought a lot of people, and he really had an amazing sense of curiosity to look at my dad and say, I wonder what his story is. And that's why, and
Yeah.
it's so great to share Pepe's story with you guys because, I've always been curious about Pepe's story at being production assistant 24 on the film Ragtime and on-set observer of
Out of 25.
I thought you were
Wow.
24. But
No, it's
anyway,
not. It's very nice that you dedicated to Jacob.
yeah.
Uh,
So why don't we allow other people to, I guess, ask some questions too? I see Ryan had a question.
okay.
Mhm.
I guess don't make him journalistic as your advice, or
No,
No, make him anything you want. Yeah, it's like